So yeah, today we'll be dealing with the pulse. So before going deeper into the pulse, first we have to know the normal pulse wave. So the normal pulse wave can make it like the percussion wave, and the peak is the tidal wave. It's something called dicrotic knots, and there is dicrotic wave. So this dicrotic knots is characterized by the closure of AV valves. So this is S1 and S2. This is systolic phase. This is diastolic phase. This is also called the reflected wave, and this is percussion wave. Because this is why it is called reflected wave, because in the diastolic phase there is the elastic recoil of the arterial wall, and which is characterized by the wave that is formed after the dicrotic knots. By knowing this, I have listed three different types of pulses. The first one is pulsus bisfiriens, pulsus dicroticus, and pulsus bigeminy. So what is the major difference in this kind of pulses? Is pulsus by bisfiriens is characterized, the name itself implies that bis means two, bisfiriens means stroke or beat. This two is not same as die. The bis means two at a time, or at the systolic phase. So there are two waves that are felt during the systolic phase in pulsus bisfiriens. So what are the different conditions that we can feel two different pulses in pulsus bisfiriens? The common one is aortic incompetence or regurgitation. It is also sometimes associated with aortic stenosis and aortic regurgitation, and also found in HOCM, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. So we find two beats in systolic phase in pulsus bisfiriens. And in pulsus dicroticus, we also feel the two waves, or the next wave is felt in dicrotic phase. Pulsus dicroticus means in dicrotic phase. This is dicrotic phase. This is anacrotic phase, and this is dicrotic phase. So we feel another beat in this dicrotic phase because of exaggeration of this dicrotic wave in pulsus dicroticus. So it is also characterized by this M-shaped pulse wave. We can also say in the pulsus dicroticus. So what are the different conditions that we can feel the pulsus dicroticus? Is because of decreased in arterial resistance conditions, like in typhoid fever, second week of typhoid fever, in septic shock, in hypovolemia. These are the conditions which we can find in the pulsus dicroticus. And another entity is pulsus bigeminy. This is the kind of pulse which is found in different kind of blocks, like in Mobius type 2. There is something called 3:2 block. 3 means arterial contraction, atrial contraction, and 2 means ventricular contraction. So there is some kind of block in this kind of 3:2 Mobius type 2 block. So what happens is, we find two ventricular beat or two pulses, and there is gap compensatory pause, and there is again two beats. So this pulsus bigeminy is found in heart block. In 3:2 block we can find pulsus bigeminy. There is something called trigeminy also, in which we feel three different pulses, compensatory gap, and three different pulses. This is pulsus bigeminy. Other different kind of pulses are pulsus alterans, which means alteration of the amplitude of the waves, like we can find that in heart failure. Like in heart failure, the amplitude decreases. Every alternating wave has decreased amplitude because in different conditions, like in heart failure, we can find that kind of pulses. In pulses, there is something called pulsus paradoxus. Paradox itself is self-explanatory why there is pulsus paradoxus. Why there is paradox of pulse in pulsus paradoxus, like in condition of cardiac tamponade, in severe asthma, okay, in COPD, in some 15 to 20% of obstructive pericarditis, we find pulsus paradoxus. So, what is the mechanism of pulsus paradoxus? Consider it is a heart, and when you inspire, there is decrease in intrathoracic pressure. So the maximum amount of blood goes into the right atrium and into the right ventricle. Okay, and when you have pulsus paradoxus, like in cardiac tamponade or constrictive pericarditis, the amount of the compliance is decreased of this whole heart, and when you inspire, increased amount of blood go into the right ventricle, and there is something called ventricular interdependence, ventricular interdependence, and the increased amount of blood which go into the right ventricle will push the septum towards the left ventricle. So what happens is there is decreased in amount of blood in the left ventricle. When this systole occurs, the cardiac output will decrease in inspiratory phase. And what happens is when you take the blood pressure, the systolic blood pressure will decrease more than 10 mmHg during inspiration. The interesting question is, we consider pulsus paradoxus after measuring the blood pressure, but we use the name pulsus. Why it is so? I have a question for you, okay? And there is something called, there's one entity called anacrotic wave, which is also called pulsus parvus tardus, which is slow rising and low volume pulse, which is found in aortic stenosis. And yeah, these are the different kind of pulses